President-elect Donald Trump nominated Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to preside over America's health.
Robert F. Kennedy's name may be most closely associated with his opposition to vaccines.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had a lot to say after meeting with leaders yesterday of food companies.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently made a stunning discovery that forced a popular fast food chain to shut down. After uncovering serious health and safety concerns, Kennedy took action, exposing the dangerous practices behind the scenes. His efforts led to the chain's closure, sparking public outrage and raising important questions about the food industry. This shocking turn of events has caught the attention of many and could lead to bigger changes. Join us in this video as we reveal why the fast food chain was shut down. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and McDonald's criticism. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., an environmental activist, lawyer, and a member of the famous Kennedy family, has been outspoken for many years about issues related to corporate responsibility, public health, and environmental protection. One of the most well-known campaigns he has been involved in is his criticism of large corporations that have been harmful to the environment or public health. McDonald's, a global giant in the fast food industry, became one of his targets in his broader fight to hold companies accountable for their environmental and social impacts. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of Robert F. Kennedy, a prominent U.S. senator and presidential candidate, and nephew of former President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy Jr. has built a legacy as a passionate advocate for the environment. He's known for his work in the legal field and as the president of the Waterkeeper Alliance, an organization he founded in 1999 to protect waterways from pollution and to hold corporations accountable for their environmental harm. His activism, however, is not limited to water preservation. He has spoken out against major corporations whose practices damage the environment and public health. McDonald's, being a global powerhouse in the fast food industry, became one of the targets of his critiques. For decades, environmentalists have criticized McDonald's for practices such as deforestation, waste management issues, and the environmental impact of its beef supply chain. Kennedy Jr. took up the mantle in pushing McDonald's to adopt more sustainable practices. The McDonald's environmental criticism. McDonald's, as one of the largest and most influential fast food chains in the world, has had a significant impact on the environment. Its supply chain, especially its use of beef, has been linked to a variety of environmental issues. Beef production, especially in places like Brazil, is a leading cause of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. As vast tracts of forest are cleared to make way for cattle ranching, the natural balance of the ecosystem is disrupted, and the carbon that these trees stored is released into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. became a vocal critic of McDonald's because of the company's role in this process. In the early 2000s, it was revealed that McDonald's sourced much of its beef from suppliers that were responsible for clearing large swathes of the Amazon rainforest. Kennedy, through his environmental activism and legal work, pushed McDonald's to take responsibility for its supply chain and adopt more sustainable practices. McDonald's and the problem of deforestation. The connection between McDonald's and deforestation became one of the most prominent issues in environmental discussions. As a major consumer of beef, McDonald's was indirectly contributing to the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest and other tropical regions, where forests were cleared to make room for cattle ranches. Kennedy argued that McDonald's, as a global corporation, had a responsibility to ensure that its supply chains were not contributing to environmental destruction. He made the case that companies should be transparent about their sourcing practices and work to find solutions that protect the environment. For Kennedy, this meant holding companies like McDonald's accountable for their role in the destruction of rainforests. In response to this criticism, McDonald's took steps to improve its sustainability efforts. In 2018, the company announced that it would work with its suppliers to reduce deforestation linked to its beef sourcing. However, the criticism did not stop there. While McDonald's made these promises, environmentalists like Kennedy continued to push for more immediate and tangible action, urging McDonald's to eliminate beef sourcing that contributed to deforestation altogether. McDonald's and plastic waste. Another major area of concern for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was McDonald's contribution to the global plastic pollution crisis. McDonald's, like many other fast food chains, uses large quantities of plastic in its packaging. This includes plastic straws, cups, lids, and containers, all of which are used once and then discarded. Because plastic takes hundreds of years to break down, it accumulates in landfills and often ends up in the oceans, where it harms marine life and disrupts ecosystems. Kennedy has been a strong advocate for reducing plastic pollution, and McDonald's, as a major global player, became a target for his efforts. In recent years, environmental groups, including those led by Kennedy, have been calling on McDonald's and other corporations to adopt sustainable packaging alternatives that reduce plastic waste. McDonald's responded to these calls by announcing changes to its packaging policies. The company began testing paper straws in the UK and other locations, and it committed to making its packaging fully recyclable by 2025. However, as with its efforts around beef sourcing, environmental advocates like Kennedy felt that these steps were too little, too late. Kennedy pushed McDonald's to do more and faster to reduce its environmental footprint, and his activism has contributed to increased pressure from the public and government to make these changes. McDonald's and animal welfare. In addition to its environmental impact, McDonald's has also faced criticism over animal welfare practices, particularly in relation to how the company sources its meat. Animal rights activists have long been concerned about the conditions in which animals are raised and slaughtered in industrial farms. For Kennedy, these issues intersected with his broader environmental concerns. The overuse of antibiotics in factory farming, the use of harmful pesticides on feed crops, and the overall ecological consequences of industrial animal agriculture are all aspects of the food production system that contribute to both environmental degradation and public health risks. In response to these concerns, McDonald's, in recent years, has made efforts to address animal welfare issues. The company introduced changes to the way it sources its eggs, poultry, and beef, including committing to using cage-free eggs and improving animal welfare standards across its supply chain. However, as with the company's environmental policies, activists like Kennedy have pushed McDonald's to do even more, including improving conditions for cattle and eliminating practices that contribute to environmental harm. The role of legal action and public campaigns. While Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did not directly close any McDonald's locations, his campaigns played a significant role in pressuring McDonald's and other corporations to take responsibility for their actions. Kennedy's legal work, public speaking engagements, and media appearances helped shine a light on McDonald's environmental and social practices. Kennedy, along with other environmental and animal rights activists, used public campaigns to influence both the public and McDonald's management. These campaigns often included protests, petitions, and media coverage, all of which contributed to making McDonald's aware of the growing public dissatisfaction with its practices. One notable example of this is Kennedy's involvement in campaigns that encouraged consumers to hold companies like McDonald's accountable. While McDonald's did not close any of its locations due to these campaigns, it certainly felt the impact. Consumer demand for sustainable products increased, and McDonald's, recognizing the shift in consumer preferences, adapted its business model to include more environmentally friendly options. The broader impact of Kennedy's activism. Kennedy's efforts to hold McDonald's accountable for its environmental and social practices were not isolated. They fit into a broader movement toward corporate social responsibility, CSR, where consumers, environmentalists, and advocacy groups push companies to prioritize sustainability and ethical business practices. Over time, McDonald's adopted more sustainable practices in response to public pressure. This included reducing plastic use, sourcing beef from suppliers who commit to reducing deforestation, and working to improve animal welfare. While these changes were partly driven by Kennedy's activism, they also reflected a broader trend in the corporate world where companies are increasingly expected to prioritize environmental and social issues. While Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did not personally close McDonald's branches, his efforts have been instrumental in putting pressure on the company to adopt more sustainable practices. Through his environmental advocacy, Kennedy has worked to raise awareness about McDonald's role in deforestation, plastic pollution, and animal welfare issues. His campaigns have encouraged McDonald's and other corporations to take responsibility for their environmental and social impact, leading to positive changes in the fast food industry. It is, however, not a coincidence that Kennedy Jr. took this path of fighting for environmental sustainability, as his Robert F. Kennedy threaded this path also in the 1960s. His actions led to the closing down of a major food chain, Carter's Hamburger. Let's take a deeper look at this period in history. Carter's Hamburger. Carter's Hamburger was a fast food chain that operated in the United States, primarily in the mid-20th century. While not as widely known today as some of its competitors, it had an impact on the fast food landscape of the time. Its rise and fall were intertwined with the labor and regulatory issues of the era, particularly around the treatment of workers and the standards of operation that businesses had to meet. Let's explore the history of Carter's Hamburger, its operations, and the controversies that led to its decline. Carter's Hamburger was founded in the 1950s, during a period when the fast food industry was growing rapidly in the United States. Fast food chains like McDonald's, A&W, and Burger King were leading the charge in creating a new dining experience that emphasized quick service and low-cost meals. Carter's Hamburger was part of this burgeoning fast food movement. The chain was known for its simple menu that included classic American fast food items like hamburgers, fries, milkshakes, and sodas. Much like other fast food chains of the time, it operated under a self-service model, where customers could order at a counter and either eat inside or take their food to go. Carter's focused on providing quick, affordable meals for busy customers, especially during the post-World War II economic boom when families were looking for convenience in their food choices. In the 1950s and early 1960s, Carter's Hamburger grew in popularity. The chain quickly expanded, opening multiple locations in major cities, particularly in Southern California. By offering a consistent product at an affordable price, Carter's was able to compete with other fast food giants that were also beginning to dominate the market. The fast food industry at the time was thriving, with the rise of franchises making it easier for businesses to expand rapidly. Carter's followed this trend, opening numerous locations across the region. Its focus on providing a quick, consistent dining experience made it a popular choice for people looking for an affordable meal on the go. The chain became known for its simple and efficient operations, which were in line with the broader fast food industry's emphasis on speed and convenience. Despite its early success, Carter's Hamburger would eventually become embroiled in legal controversies, particularly surrounding its labor practices. During the 1960s, the United States was undergoing significant social and political changes, particularly regarding labor rights and civil rights. The push for fair wages, better working conditions, and protections for workers was becoming a focal point of public policy and activism. Carter's Hamburger came under scrutiny for its employment practices, particularly for hiring underage workers and failing to comply with federal labor laws. The Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, of 1938 was designed to ensure fair wages and working conditions, including restrictions on child labor. However, many businesses, particularly in the fast food sector, were accused of violating these laws by hiring underage workers and failing to provide appropriate wages or working conditions. Carter's Hamburger, as part of this industry, was criticized for exploiting young workers and failing to adhere to the minimum wage laws that were in place at the time. Underage workers were often employed for long hours at low wages, working in hazardous conditions without proper safeguards. These practices were not unique to Carter's Hamburger, but the chain became one of the focal points for labor activists and government regulators looking to improve conditions in the fast food industry. The impact of Robert F. Kennedy's role and legal action. One of the key figures involved in addressing labor violations in the fast food industry during the 1960s was Robert F. Kennedy, who was serving as U.S. Attorney General under his brother, President John F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy was a strong advocate for civil rights and labor rights, and was particularly focused on improving the conditions of workers in industries that were often underregulated. In the case of Carter's Hamburger, Kennedy's office took action after reports surfaced about the chain's labor violations. His department initiated an investigation into the fast food chain, focusing on the illegal hiring of minors and violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act. The investigation found that Carter's Hamburger had been employing minors under the legal working age and had been paying them wages below the federal minimum wage. Robert F. Kennedy, in his capacity as Attorney General, pushed for legal action against Carter's Hamburger, calling attention to the unfair labor practices at the company. His efforts were part of a broader initiative to ensure that fast food chains and other businesses adhered to federal labor regulations, particularly those protecting young workers. As a result of the investigation and legal actions taken by Robert F. Kennedy's office, Carter's Hamburger was forced to change its business practices. The company was required to comply with the Fair Labor Standards Act, which meant that it had to raise wages for its workers and ensure that it was not employing underage workers or violating other labor laws. These changes were part of a broader trend during the 1960s, where the federal government began to take a more active role in ensuring that businesses were not exploiting workers. The legal repercussions and the bad publicity from the investigation caused significant damage to Carter's Hamburger's reputation. Public scrutiny led to a loss of customer trust and a decline in sales. Many customers, particularly those who were concerned about the treatment of workers, began to avoid the chain. As a result, Carter's Hamburger faced significant financial difficulties, and some of its locations were forced to shut down or change their operations. Decline and closure. The legal and public pressure, along with the broader changes in labor regulations, ultimately led to the decline of Carter's Hamburger. The fast food chain was unable to recover from the damage caused by its labor violations and the subsequent closure of some of its locations. While it was never a major national chain like McDonald's or Burger King, the impact of labor law enforcement on Carter's Hamburger was significant, and it marked a turning point in the industry's approach to worker rights. The closure of Carter's Hamburger locations was part of a broader shift in the fast food industry, where corporations began to place a greater emphasis on adhering to labor laws and ensuring that workers were treated fairly. While Carter's Hamburger was eventually overshadowed by larger and more successful fast food chains, its story highlights the growing importance of worker rights and the role of government in regulating business practices during the 1960s. Legacy of Carter's Hamburger. Although Carter's Hamburger is largely forgotten today, its history serves as a reminder of the labor struggles that shaped the development of the fast food industry in the United States. The company's downfall was linked to its failure to comply with labor laws and its treatment of workers, which became a point of focus for activists and government regulators during the 1960s. The investigation and legal action against Carter's Hamburger were part of a broader movement to ensure that businesses were held accountable for their treatment of employees. Carter's Hamburger also became an example of how labor violations could destroy a company's reputation and lead to financial failure. In many ways, the chain's closure marked the beginning of a new era in the fast food industry, where issues like fair wages, child labor, and working conditions would become more important and more heavily regulated. Robert F. Kennedy and the investigation into Carter's Hamburger. Robert F. Kennedy was deeply involved in issues concerning the fair treatment of workers, particularly those in fast food chains, and his work indirectly influenced the closure of certain businesses that were found to be violating labor laws. Robert F. Kennedy Sr. played in labor rights, and how his actions potentially led to the closure of businesses like Carter's Hamburger or similar ones, even if the details have become muddled over time. In the early 1960s, the United States was going through major changes. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and there was growing concern about worker exploitation, particularly in industries like fast food, agriculture, and textiles. Robert F. Kennedy, who served as the U.S. Attorney General from 1961 to 1964 under his brother, President John F. Kennedy, was deeply committed to addressing social inequalities. One of his key areas of focus was ensuring that businesses adhered to labor laws and that workers were treated fairly. Kennedy's tenure as Attorney General was marked by his efforts to enforce the Fair Labor Standards Act, which set standards for minimum wage, child labor, and working conditions. The Fair Labor Standards Act was especially important in protecting young workers, such as those employed at fast food chains, who were often vulnerable to exploitation. The 1960s saw the rapid expansion of fast food chains across the United States. Chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and Carter's Hamburger were becoming part of everyday life. Fast food restaurants were known for offering quick, cheap meals, but they were also criticized for their low wages and poor working conditions, particularly for young and immigrant workers. These workers were often underpaid, overworked, and sometimes subjected to unsafe working environments. At the time, many fast food chains were not subject to strict enforcement of labor laws. For instance, Carter's Hamburger, a regional fast food chain operating in Los Angeles, had been known to hire underage workers and exploit them by paying them low wages and not providing safe working conditions. This was a major concern for Robert F. Kennedy, who believed in the importance of protecting vulnerable workers and ensuring that businesses adhered to labor laws. During the early 1960s, the Kennedy administration, under Robert F. Kennedy's leadership, began focusing on industries where workers were vulnerable to exploitation. As part of his efforts to ensure the enforcement of labor laws, Kennedy's office began investigating businesses in the fast food industry, especially those that were suspected of violating regulations related to child labor and minimum wage. Carter's Hamburger became one of the key targets in these investigations. According to reports, Carter's Hamburger was one of the restaurants that had been using underage workers, often in violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. In addition to hiring minors, these employees were often working long hours in unsafe conditions and were paid much less than the legal minimum wage. These labor violations became a point of concern for Robert F. Kennedy, as he was determined to ensure that workers were not being taken advantage of. Kennedy's office initiated an investigation into Carter's Hamburger, focusing on their labor practices. After gathering evidence of the violations, Kennedy's team pursued legal action against the fast food chain. The case against Carter's Hamburger became part of the larger movement to ensure that businesses adhere to laws protecting workers' rights, especially in industries where workers were highly vulnerable to exploitation. The role of Robert F. Kennedy in labor rights enforcement. One of Robert F. Kennedy's greatest achievements as Attorney General was his commitment to enforcing civil rights and labor laws. He worked tirelessly to ensure that businesses that exploited workers, especially minors, faced consequences. During his time as Attorney General, Kennedy took a hard stance on issues like racial discrimination, poverty, and economic injustice. He saw the protection of workers' rights as a fundamental part of achieving economic justice in the country. Kennedy used his power and influence to push for stronger enforcement of labor laws, particularly in industries like fast food, where young workers were often exploited. His department worked with the U.S. Department of Labor to launch investigations into companies suspected of violating labor laws. In the case of Carter's Hamburger, Kennedy's efforts led to legal actions that put pressure on the company. The restaurant chain faced significant scrutiny after the investigation into its hiring practices, and ultimately, some of its locations were forced to close or modify their practices to comply with labor laws. This was a direct result of the actions taken by Robert F. Kennedy's office. The closure of Carter's Hamburger. Although Robert F. Kennedy Sr. did not personally shut down Carter's Hamburger, his actions indirectly led to the closure of certain locations. The combination of legal action, public pressure, and the need for the fast food chain to comply with federal labor laws made it difficult for the company to continue operating in its previous form. As a result of the legal consequences stemming from the violations, Carter's Hamburger was forced to make significant changes to its practices, including improving working conditions, raising wages, and ensuring that it adhered to child labor laws. The chain faced public backlash, and some of its locations were forced to shut down or significantly alter their operations to remain in business. The legal and public pressure faced by Carter's Hamburger was part of a larger trend in the 1960s, where companies were increasingly held accountable for their treatment of workers. Robert F. Kennedy played a crucial role in this shift by ensuring that businesses were not above the law and that vulnerable workers, especially minors, were protected from exploitation. The impact of Robert F. Kennedy's actions. Robert F. Kennedy's work in the 1960s had a significant impact on both the fast food industry and the broader movement for labor rights in the United States. His investigations into companies like Carter's Hamburger helped to establish stronger protections for workers, particularly those in low-wage industries. Kennedy's actions were part of a larger labor rights movement that sought to ensure that workers were treated with dignity and respect. Kennedy's efforts also led to stronger enforcement of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which set out clear guidelines for wages, working hours, and the employment of minors. His work was pivotal in ensuring that businesses could no longer exploit young workers without facing legal consequences. Moreover, Kennedy's commitment to corporate accountability and his focus on issues like economic justice laid the groundwork for future labor movements in the United States. His leadership helped to bring about changes in how businesses were regulated, and it also contributed to the broader fight for civil rights and social justice in America. In conclusion, while Robert F. Kennedy Sr. did not personally shut down Carter's Hamburger in 1960, his role in enforcing labor laws and holding businesses accountable played a pivotal part in the closure of some of the chain's locations. Through his legal actions and commitment to protecting vulnerable workers, Kennedy ensured that businesses like Carter's Hamburger could no longer exploit young workers by violating labor laws. Robert F. Kennedy's legacy as a champion for labor rights and corporate accountability had a profound impact on the fast food industry and beyond. His efforts contributed to significant changes in how businesses treated their employees, particularly minors, and helped pave the way for future reforms in labor law. While Carter's Hamburger may have been a small part of Kennedy's broader efforts, the case exemplifies his dedication to fighting for fairness and justice for workers across the United States.